Corrupt judge and cops set up black woman. Regret it when she reveals she's an FBI agent. Picture this: a tense courtroom in downtown Atlanta, a looming judge who seems untouchable, and a quiet black woman standing at the defendant's table, her eyes burning with silent resolve. Everyone believes they're about to witness a routine sentencing, but what they don't know is that the courtroom itself is a ticking time bomb of secrets. Layers of corruption hide beneath the judge's robe and behind the badges of certain crooked cops. Little do they realize, the woman they're railroading holds an even bigger secret. She's an undercover FBI agent with enough evidence to bring the entire system crashing down around them. A humid, late summer heatwave gripped the city of Atlanta, its air thick with both anticipation and untold stories. Skyscrapers glittered in the distance, reflecting a sunset that seemed reluctant to dip below the horizon. In the quieter outskirts of the city, shadows grew long on the streets, and neon signs buzzed to life outside convenience stores. Aaliyah Carter cut a striking figure as she walked purposefully down a worn sidewalk. She was tall, with an athletic build and a calm, confident demeanor that belied her modest, outward appearance. Dressed in an unassuming pair of dark jeans, a simple black t-shirt, and sneakers, she moved through the urban sprawl as if she knew exactly where she was heading. A small leather backpack hung off her shoulders, containing only the essentials, nothing that might draw unnecessary attention. Unbeknownst to the people passing by, Aaliyah had spent the past year in Atlanta on a covert assignment. Her colleagues at the FBI's Atlanta field office knew her only by her codename Obsidian, ironically apt for her ability to blend into darkness and her intense, steadfast resolve under pressure. She was a specialized undercover agent with a track record of cracking tough cases involving organized crime, money laundering, and most relevant to her current mission, corruption in public offices. But to the outside world, she was a ghost. The only Aaliyah most people encountered was a supposed small-town woman who'd recently moved here to start fresh. And in the city's labyrinth of secrets, no one suspected that she might be anything more than an ordinary bystander looking for new opportunities. This mission had started with a tip from a key informant who alleged that local officers were tampering with evidence, taking bribes from drug cartels, and funneling cash up to a highly respected judge. Rumors hinted that Judge Maxwell Covington of the Fulton County Superior Court was the ringmaster of a dangerous game. With a formidable network of allies within the local police department, he managed to keep his name squeaky clean, all while orchestrating convictions and acquittals to line his pockets. Convicted felons often left his courtroom with suspiciously light sentences if they paid enough. Meanwhile, innocent people who stumbled into the wrong crosshairs found themselves locked away. The FBI had been on Covington's trail for months, but the man was cunning. He'd never left behind a paper trail or any audible recordings that could compromise him. Accusations always dissolved under the bright lights of scrutiny. Witnesses retracted statements, evidence vanished. The Bureau needed someone on the ground, weaving themselves into the city's fabric, close enough to the players without tipping them off. That's when they decided on Aaliyah Carter. Aaliyah had methodically worked to position herself in situations where these compromised officers might take notice of her. She was patient, collecting clues from run-ins with patrolmen rumored to be on Judge Covington's payroll. She was careful not to arouse suspicion, always mindful that at the first misstep, the entire operation could collapse and her own life could be in grave danger. Walking past a tired, graffiti-tagged bus stop, Aaliyah's eyes scanned the empty bench. The phone next to the bench rang a short, sharp jingle that echoed oddly in the quiet street. Aaliyah tensed. This was her signal. She reached for the phone as if it were a normal act of curiosity. "Hello," she answered, her voice steady. "Evening," said a gruff voice on the other end. "We have confirmation that your subject will be at 437 Peachtree Lane at 9 p.m. Keep your distance and wait for our further instructions." Click. The line went dead. That voice belonged to her FBI contact, Special Agent Morris Moe Reeves, who was stationed in a van 3 blocks away, monitoring her every move via a hidden camera device in her bag. Tonight was crucial. They had a lead on one of the alleged crooked cops, Officer Gary Fulton. Rumor had it he was meeting with a known drug trafficker in an abandoned lot near the outskirts of the city. If Aaliyah could catch him accepting a bribe, it would be a small but critical step in building the mountain of evidence she needed. She replaced the phone, heart pounding not with fear, but with the adrenaline that always ignited when she was close to cracking a case. She would approach the location, pretend to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, maybe ask for directions if approached. It was a delicate dance of being conspicuous enough to matter, but not so conspicuous as to draw immediate suspicion. That was the art of undercover work. A single street lamp flickered overhead as Aaliyah crossed an intersection. Her phone buzzed. Another coded text from Mo read, "Stay on your toes." Aaliyah knew all too well that the lines between friend and foe had blurred in this city. She had no illusions about how deep the corruption ran. Judge Covington's fingers were said to reach into every corner, from law enforcement to local politicians to even some state officials. Every step she took felt as though she was walking on a tightrope above a pit of vipers. One miscalculation, one slip, and she'd be lost. She pressed on. Tonight might be the start of the endgame. At 8:55 p.m., Aaliyah slipped into position behind a rusted chain-link fence. The lot at 437 Peachtree Lane was a sorry sight. Scorched trash cans, graffiti scrawled in bright neon colors, and shards of broken glass that crunched underfoot. Weeds sprouted through the cracked concrete, lit sporadically by the weak glow of a single overhead lamp that bathed the area in a sickly yellow haze. She crouched behind a collapsed concrete slab, scanning the scene. Her vantage point gave her a clear view of the lot. 10 minutes passed, then 15. At exactly 9:15 p.m., headlights cut through the darkness. A battered black sedan rolled in, its engine rattling like a cough. Out stepped Officer Gary Fulton, dressed in civilian clothes, but with the swagger of a cop who believed he owned the place. The glint in his eyes betrayed a simmering arrogance. Moments later, another car, a sleek silver Mercedes, pulled up, its tinted windows reflecting the feeble light overhead. The Mercedes door opened, revealing a well-dressed man wearing polished shoes and a tailored suit. His gold watch caught Aaliyah's eye. This man was no small-time dealer. He carried himself with the air of someone with power, or at least with a lot of money. They met in the middle of the lot, shaking hands briskly. Aaliyah's heart pounded as she activated the mini camera hidden in her cross necklace. She prayed the angle was good enough to capture the exchange. She saw the second man slip a thick envelope into Officer Fulton's jacket pocket. Fulton patted the envelope, grinning. He nodded in satisfaction. She couldn't hear their conversation, but the body language was clear. Money had changed hands. A handshake was sealed. Suddenly, the silver Mercedes door slammed shut, drawing Fulton's attention. The exchange ended as abruptly as it began. Officer Fulton stepped back, and the man returned to his car. The vehicles sped off in opposite directions, leaving the lot deserted once again. Aaliyah waited a few beats to ensure the coast was clear, then tapped a hidden earpiece. "Mo, do you copy?" "Loud and clear," came the crisp reply. "Got it all on film," she whispered. Moving to the next rendezvous. "Be careful, Fulton might be on edge. Keep your distance." Aaliyah quietly slipped away from the lot, her mind spinning with the possibilities. This footage was a good start, actual visual evidence of Officer Fulton accepting a bribe. But she needed more, something that tied this directly to Judge Covington. Word on the street was that Covington rarely interacted with the dirty cops face to face. He used intermediaries or secret accounts, never leaving any direct link. The bulletproof nature of his operation was exactly what made him so dangerous. She made her way down a side street when she noticed a patrol car sitting idly near an intersection. Two uniformed officers were inside, Officers Todd Miller and Eric Rodriguez. Both had come up in her earlier investigations. They were rumored to run petty errands for Fulton, sometimes cleaning up minor messes or diverting attention. They might also be on Judge Covington's payroll at least. That's what the rumblings suggested. As soon as Aliyah stepped onto that intersection, the patrol car's headlights flicked on, illuminating her like a stage spotlight. She froze. The car crawled forward, the tinted passenger side window sliding down to reveal Miller's stern face. "Ma'am," he said, "what brings you to this part of town?" She forced a tight smile. "Just walking home from work," she replied, feigning innocence. "Is that a problem?" Rodriguez, the driver, regarded her carefully. "These streets aren't safe at this hour, especially not for a woman walking alone." "Got any ID?" Aliyah's heart thumped, but she remained composed. She knew that handing them her official ID revealing she was FBI would blow her cover instantly. Instead, she produced the false driver's license the Bureau had provided, under the alias Brianna Walters. "This is a rough neighborhood," Rodriguez said, scrutinizing the license as if searching for any sign of forgery. "You live around here?" "Yeah, a few blocks over." She lied smoothly. "Been here a few months now, just trying to get by." The two officers exchanged a glance. It wasn't a friendly one. They seemed unconvinced, perhaps sensing something off about her. But lacking concrete cause, they couldn't exactly arrest her on the spot without risking scrutiny. Miller returned the ID, nodding for her to move along. "Get home safe," he muttered. "Don't linger." With her pulse still hammering, Aliyah walked away. She could feel their gazes boring into her back. Even though the immediate threat passed, alarm bells rang in her mind. These cops might have recognized her from somewhere, maybe from a different mission, or from Fulton's own internal network. But if they had recognized her, why let her go? She turned a corner and let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Paranoia was part of the job. It kept her alive. But the tension of not knowing who among the ranks was dirty and how high up the corruption went made every encounter perilous. "Mo," she whispered into her mic, "I think they suspect something." "We have your location," he replied. "There's a safe house 2 blocks over on Briarcrest. Head there, lay low. We'll regroup." Aliyah nodded to herself. The night was only just beginning, and she had already danced too close to the flames. She made her way toward the safe house, her mind replaying the bribe she had caught on camera. It was solid evidence, but not enough to bring down Judge Covington. She needed more, and she needed it soon. Little did she know, the biggest trap was already being set, one that would cast her directly into the crosshairs of a system designed to crush those who dared to challenge it. It happened 3 nights later, when Aliyah was feeling both emboldened and cautious, sometimes a dangerous mix. She had started piecing together valuable evidence, the video of Officer Fulton, corroborating statements from local citizens too scared to speak on record, and suspicious financial transactions flagged by the FBI's forensic accountants. Everything pointed toward a vast corruption network, with Judge Covington at its center. In a near-deserted diner on the outskirts of downtown, Aliyah was sitting at a booth, nursing a cup of coffee. Rain pelted the windows, creating a dreary lullaby of droplets. She wore simple clothes, A hoodie pulled up to obscure her face and kept a low profile as she waited for an informant, someone who claimed to have direct knowledge of Covington's money laundering pipelines. Time dragged. The diner's fluorescent lights hummed. A bored waitress refilled her coffee twice. Finally, the door swung open and in walked a man in a cheap suit. He glanced around, saw Aaliyah, and made his way over. He introduced himself under a pseudonym, Johnson, though Aaliyah suspected that wasn't his real name. They spoke in hushed tones, the man supplying bits of intel, names of shell companies, suspicious real estate deals around Buckhead, and even a rumored connection to a local street gang that Covington used for intimidation. It was more than she had hoped for. She discreetly recorded his statements on her phone. If verified, this information could blow the case wide open. Midway through the conversation, the door banged open again. 2 police officers entered, and Aaliyah's stomach clenched. It was Officer Fulton, wearing a satisfied smirk, and his partner, Sergeant Lorraine Briggs. Briggs had an air of authority about her, a tough, no-nonsense stance. She scanned the diner with a hawk-like gaze. "Right on time," Johnson muttered under his breath, sounding terrified. Aaliyah realized with a sinking feeling that she'd been set up. Johnson slid out of the booth in a panic, but it was too late. Fulton and Briggs approached swiftly. "Well, well," Fulton drawled, looking down at her. "If it isn't Brianna Walters. Funny seeing you out here in the middle of the night." Aaliyah attempted a calm facade. "Just having coffee. Got some ID on you?" Briggs demanded. She presented her alias license again, but Briggs merely sneered. "Let's do a quick check." The sergeant grabbed her arm forcefully, pulling her out of the booth. Johnson tried to slink away, but Fulton stepped in front of him, blocking his path. Another officer, the one she hadn't noticed, lingering by the door, slapped cuffs on Johnson. "We know who you are," Fulton hissed at Aaliyah. "You think we haven't seen the way you've been snooping around?" The tension in the diner shot through the roof. The waitress watched from behind the counter with wide eyes, but said nothing. It was obvious the police had total control of the situation. Aaliyah's mind raced. She was carrying her phone with incriminating recordings, but any attempt to retrieve it might escalate the confrontation. Briggs yanked Aaliyah's arm behind her back. Aaliyah felt the cold metal of handcuffs clamp around her wrists. She could have resisted her training, allowed her to take down at least 2 of them if it came to blows, but that would blow her cover completely. The best she could do was play along, let them think they had the upper hand. "Brianna Walters, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice, conspiracy to distribute narcotics, and possession of a controlled substance," Briggs declared, the statement obviously rehearsed to ensure the charges stuck. "Wait, what?" Aaliyah tried to mask her shock. "I don't have anything on me." Fulton pulled out a small plastic bag from his pocket, a bag filled with white powder. He held it up theatrically for everyone to see, wearing a smug grin. "We found this on you," he announced, slipping it into an evidence pouch. "The perfect frame job." Johnson tried to protest. "That's not hers," but a swift punch to his gut from the other officer shut him up. Aaliyah felt her anger flare. This was an old trick, planting evidence to justify an arrest. She had seen it before, but never been on the receiving end. By arresting her, the crooked cops could keep her from investigating further and potentially discredit any future evidence she tried to present. She glanced around, catching sight of a security camera in the corner of the diner. Its small, red light blinked. If that camera recorded the officers planting evidence, she might have a lifeline. But they could easily confiscate that footage or bribe the owner to erase it. She had no illusions about how little it would take for these cops to cover their tracks. Nonetheless, she had to fight for any advantage. "Check that camera," she said, staring directly at the waitress, hoping to plant a seed of doubt. "You'll see the truth." Briggs laughed cruelly. "Oh, don't worry. We'll review all necessary footage. But for now, you're coming with us." Forced outside, rain pounded her as they pushed her into the back of a patrol car. Aaliyah felt the sting of betrayal. She'd walked straight into a trap. Officer Fulton climbed into the driver's seat while Briggs settled in the passenger side. Johnson was taken away in another cruiser. The silent drive began, the city lights smearing across the windows in the downpour. In the rearview mirror, Fulton locked eyes with Aaliyah. "Looks like you messed with the wrong people," he said, almost gleefully. "Hope you're ready for a long stay behind bars." Aaliyah remained silent, the wheels in her head turning. She still had her earpiece, a slender, nearly invisible device. If Mo or someone from the bureau was listening, now might be the only chance to alert them. But she couldn't speak openly without tipping Fulton off. As they pulled into the precinct, she felt a growing sense of unease. If Judge Covington was as powerful as they all feared, he'd make sure the charges stuck. Her carefully laid plans to expose corruption were crumbling around her. She told herself to stay calm. She was an FBI agent, trained for high-stakes scenarios. And this was about as high stakes as it got. They dragged her into a holding area, slammed her against a wall, and began to pat her down more thoroughly. Fulton and Briggs were careful to remove her watch, her necklace, even her shoes, anything that might contain hidden technology. The earpiece, so small it nestled deep inside her ear canal, went undetected. She was placed in a cramped holding cell, the door clanging shut behind her. A row of other detainees lined the cold metal benches. Most were too absorbed in their own misery to notice her arrival. Flickering overhead lights cast an anemic glow. The stench of stale sweat and hopelessness hung in the air. Aaliyah sank onto a bench, her mind racing. She had to find a way out, and fast. But she couldn't blow her cover just yet, not until she knew that doing so would guarantee Covington's downfall. What if the moment she revealed herself, all the evidence mysteriously vanished? No, she had to wait, gather her bearings, and figure out who in the department might still be clean, or at least not on Covington's payroll. Across the cell, she caught sight of Johnson, hunched over and cradling his ribs where he'd been struck. Their eyes met. He gave her a helpless shrug, as if to say, "I tried." She nodded, acknowledging that he'd been used as bait, just like her. Time passed slowly. Occasionally, an officer would walk by and smirk at her. A couple of times, she overheard snickers about how the new fish was going to learn her lesson. If only they knew. Aaliyah had survived far worse in her line of work. Eventually, a female officer appeared, her face etched with professional disinterest. "Carter, Walters," she corrected herself, calling Aaliyah to her feet. "Let's go." Aaliyah was escorted down a long corridor, her arms still bound behind her back. They entered a small interrogation room with a metal table and 2 chairs. A buzzing overhead light threatened to short out every few seconds. In the corner, a camera lens glared down at them. Standing by the table was Sergeant Briggs, arms crossed. Next to her was Judge Maxwell Covington himself. Aaliyah's pulse quickened. She had never met the man in person. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit despite the late hour, with a calm, self-assured aura that radiated power. "Sergeant," Covington said, his voice a smooth baritone, "leave us." Briggs cast him a skeptical glance but obeyed, shutting the door behind her. Now it was just Aaliyah and Covington in the cramped, fluorescent, lit room. He paced for a moment, eyeing her with an expression that mingled curiosity and disdain. "I've heard interesting things about you," he said finally. "Fulton says you've been poking your nose where it doesn't belong, spying on my officers, asking too many questions." He arched an eyebrow. "Who are you?" Aaliyah kept her gaze level. "Just a concerned citizen." Covington laughed, a low, humorless chuckle. "Don't insult my intelligence." "You think I don't know who you are, Miss Carter?" "Yes, that's right. I know your real name. You're an FBI agent, aren't you? I just haven't found the proof yet." Aaliyah's heart thumped, so he suspected, but wasn't fully certain. If he had concrete proof, he wouldn't be questioning her, he'd have her quietly taken care of. Still, the fact that he'd dug up her real name meant he was dangerously close to confirming his suspicions. He leaned over the table, locking eyes with her. "Listen carefully, Miss Carter. The people I work with, they don't take kindly to threats. If you keep poking around, you're going to end up buried under so many charges you'll never see daylight again. And I can make that happen with a single signature." In the silence that followed, Aaliyah felt the weight of his threat. She kept her poker face. "I don't know what you think you have on me, but I'm innocent." "Innocent," Covington repeated. How quaint. He stood up straight, flicking an invisible speck of dust from his suit jacket. "Your arraignment hearing will be tomorrow morning. Don't bother pleading innocent. My word in that courtroom is law. If you cooperate and give me every piece of evidence you've collected, I might be willing to let you off with a light sentence. Enough to scare you away from meddling in matters you don't understand." Aaliyah stared back, unyielding. Covington's face hardened. "Have it your way," he said finally. "But know this, I've already set the wheels in motion. By this time tomorrow, you could be locked up for the next 10 years. Or more. The moment you realize I'm not bluffing, you'll wish you had taken my generous offer." He turned on his heel and strode out, leaving the door to slam in his wake. Aaliyah let out a shaky breath. She was deep in enemy territory, with precious few allies. The man she was trying to take down had her in his clutches, and worse yet, he was cunning enough to manipulate the entire system. Yet, a steely resolve built inside her. This was exactly why she'd joined the FBI, to stand against people like Covington. She'd come too far to fold now. She told herself, "Stay calm, observe, wait for your moment." Because if there was one certainty, it was that eventually Judge Maxwell Covington and his crooked officers would slip. And when they did, Aaliyah would be ready to make them regret everything they'd done. Morning arrived with a heavy grey sky, threatening more rain. Aaliyah barely slept in her holding cell, her mind too busy racing through possible ways out of this mess. She worried that the evidence she'd gathered might already be compromised. Covington's men would surely tear apart her safe house, search for backups, bribe, or threaten any local witnesses. The entire operation hung on a razor's edge. She was roused at dawn and led from the holding cell to a cramped side room where she was given a dingy orange jumpsuit and flip-flops. Under normal circumstances, an undercover FBI agent would never make it this far into standard booking procedures without a direct intervention from higher-ups. But these were not normal circumstances. Covington's power, combined with the compromised officers in his pocket, had effectively cut off any standard rescue attempts. She could only hope that her superiors were working behind the scenes to free her, but until she saw actual results, she had to assume she was on her own. Her wrists were cuffed again, and she was marched into a prisoner transport van, along with several other detainees. The short drive to the courthouse felt like an eternity. Through the slats of the metal barrier separating the driver's area, Aaliyah could see silhouettes of tall buildings pass by. She recognized the route. They were heading toward the Fulton County Courthouse, where Covington held considerable influence. The irony was thick. She was being delivered to her own execution in a place supposedly dedicated to justice. They entered through a secure garage. Guards led the detainees into a holding area within the courthouse, assigning each a seat on a long wooden bench. One by one, people were called to face the judge. Most were petty offenders, shoplifting, minor drug charges, a parole violation. Aaliyah's heart clenched with a mixture of dread and determination as she watched each case processed swiftly. Some were released on bail, others were taken back to the holding cells. Finally, her name was called. She was escorted into a large courtroom with high ceilings, ornate wooden paneling, and rows of pew-like seating. Up on the elevated bench sat Judge Maxwell Covington, robed in black, exuding confidence and authority. A court clerk announced her case number and read the charges: conspiracy to distribute narcotics, possession of a controlled substance, obstruction of justice. She stood at the defendant's table without an attorney, another sign of how thoroughly Covington had manipulated the process. Normally, she would have had immediate access to a public defender at least, but the clerk merely stated that her legal counsel was unavailable. A hush fell over the courtroom. Covington peered down at her, feigning disinterest. "Miss Brianna Walters, you are charged with serious crimes. How do you plead?" In that moment, Aaliyah debated how to respond. She was an FBI agent. She had the right to blow her cover and demand immediate intervention. But Covington had made it clear that he would bury her, and possibly any evidence she had managed to gather. If she revealed her status too soon, the entire operation could collapse without nailing Covington to the wall. She also didn't know if any other judge or higher authority figure might be able to override Covington's stranglehold on the local justice system. She took a breath, ignoring the murmurs from the small crowd in the gallery. "Not guilty," she said firmly. A sneer crossed Covington's face, though he quickly masked it. "Very well," he said. "Since you don't appear to have counsel, the court will appoint one for you." However, his tone turned icy. "I must warn you, the evidence against you is overwhelming. The state has a strong case." He then rapped his gavel once. "Bail is set at $200,000. If the defendant cannot pay, she will be remanded to custody until trial." It was an astronomically high figure for the charges. Covington knew exactly what he was doing, ensuring she stayed locked up, out of the way. Next, the bailiff guided her to a corner of the courtroom where she would wait for paperwork before being taken back to jail. The proceeding had lasted all of 5 minutes, just enough time for Covington to demonstrate his power. As she stood there, her mind whirled, searching for an opening. Suddenly, she caught a flash of movement in the gallery. Someone was waving discreetly, trying to catch her eye. She focused. It was Agent Morris Reeves. Her heart soared with relief. He wore plain clothes, a baseball cap tugged low over his forehead, trying to remain inconspicuous. A tall man with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, Mo was one of the few in the bureau she trusted implicitly. He lifted his phone slightly in a gesture that said, "Hang tight, we're working on it." Then he slipped out of the courtroom before Covington or his minions could notice. Strengthened by Mo's presence, Aaliyah stood straighter, refusing to let Covington see any hint of fear. He must have sensed something, because his dark eyes narrowed. She returned his stare evenly. If the judge wanted to break her, he'd have to do a lot more than orchestrate this show trial. Within the hour, she was loaded back into the prisoner transport van and returned to jail. This time they placed her in a more restrictive section, a single occupancy cell with a heavy door that bolted shut from outside. A grimy window allowed a sliver of light in. She spent most of the afternoon pacing the confines, her mind on a loop of strategy. The earpiece was gone now, confiscated during the strip search after her court appearance. She was effectively cut off from the outside world. At mealtime, a guard slid a tray through the slot in the door, lukewarm beans and a slice of white bread. Tucked beneath the bread was a tiny folded note. Aaliyah's eyes flicked to the small window on the door. The guard had already moved on. Carefully, she opened the note. Recording from diner security camera secured. Evidence safe. Hang on. We have a plan, Mo, she exhaled, relief washing over her. So the footage from the diner had been saved. It was still in FBI hands. That was crucial, as it showed Fulton planting the drugs on her. It wouldn't directly link Covington, but it proved the arrest was bogus and might open a door to challenging the entire process. Yet, the final takedown of Covington still required a bigger net. They needed direct evidence tying him to the bribery pipeline and the crooked officers. They needed financial records, testimonies from the involved parties, and a separate judge or federal prosecutor who couldn't be bought. Aaliyah tucked the note away, determined to keep it safe. She knew Covington would ramp up the pressure any moment. She wasn't wrong. Later that night, she was awoken by the clanging of her cell door. 2 guards escorted her to a makeshift interrogation room, less official than the one at the precinct, more like a storeroom with a lone metal chair. Inside waited Covington and Sergeant Briggs. Briggs locked the door behind them, and Covington folded his arms. "Miss Carter," he began, dropping any pretense of calling her Brianna. "I'm a busy man, so I'll get to the point. Give me the evidence." "Now." Aaliyah feigned ignorance. "I have no idea what you're talking about." A muscle in Covington's jaw twitched. He nodded at Briggs, who delivered a sharp blow to Aaliyah's stomach. Pain flared, forcing a grunt from her lips. She doubled over, only to be straightened by Briggs' next blow to the ribs. Stars danced in her vision, but she forced herself to stand upright. Covington's voice remained calm. "I'll pretend I didn't see that. Now, I believe you have footage, audio, documents, who knows what else." "Where is it?" Aaliyah spat a small amount of blood onto the floor. "Go to hell." Briggs tightened her grip on Aaliyah's shoulders, ready to strike again, but Covington held up a hand. "That's enough. I won't have you leaving bruises in obvious places. We must maintain appearances, after all." He took a step closer, lowering his voice to a menacing whisper. "Make no mistake, Miss Carter. If you don't comply, I'll make your life in prison a living nightmare. Your friends in the FBI won't be able to help you. You'll be lost in the system for years." He paused, as if letting that threat sink in. "However, if you give me what I want, perhaps we can renegotiate your release or a reduced sentence." "I'm a reasonable man." Pain radiated through Aaliyah's abdomen, but she forced a smirk. "You're a criminal, not a judge." Covington's eyes flashed with anger, but he recovered quickly. "Sergeant, take her back to her cell. Maybe a few nights without sleep will jog her memory." Briggs yanked Aaliyah upright, pushing her out of the storeroom and back down the hallway. Covington's voice echoed after them. "Tick-tock, Miss Carter." Back in her cell, Aaliyah sank onto the cot, every breath painful. Her training had prepared her for adversity, but not for being so utterly trapped by a network of corruption. Still, she clung to the promise in Moe's note. The FBI had the diner footage. They had some initial recordings of Fulton taking bribes. They had the data from the shell companies. Slowly but surely, a case was forming. She just had to endure. If Covington realized that she was too dangerous to keep alive, he might orchestrate her accidental death. But he also wanted to locate her evidence, which she prayed was safely scattered across the Bureau's servers. The only card she had left was to stall for time and hope her colleagues could secure an outside judge to sign a federal warrant against Covington and his cronies. Days blurred into a suffocating routine. An hour of pacing in her cell, tasteless meals slid through the door, occasional visits from Covington's lackeys threatening her. She refused to break. Each time, her refusal only hardened their resolve to see her destroyed. Unbeknownst to her, a storm was brewing outside, one that would soon bring Covington and his allies to their knees. Aaliyah's FBI team was quietly coordinating with the Department of Justice, gathering enough evidence to request an emergency injunction in federal court beyond Covington's reach. The plan was to swoop in, free Aaliyah, and arrest the judge and his crooked officers all at once. But the timing had to be perfect. Too soon, and Covington would slip away, possibly taking revenge on Aaliyah in the process. As the tension escalated, so did the stakes. Covington grew bolder, sure that his intimidation tactics would eventually yield the information he sought. Little did he know that he was also being watched, and that the final showdown was nearer than any of them realized. One afternoon, after another unremarkable meal, a guard appeared at Aaliyah's cell door. He was tall and lanky, with a mild, unassuming face she didn't recognize. "Prisoner transfer," he said shortly, indicating for her to stand. Aaliyah tensed. This was new. "Transfer where?" he shrugged. "Orders from up top. I just move you. Let's go." Uncertainty gnawed at her. Covington could be moving her to a privately owned facility where he had even more control. Or perhaps the FBI had intervened. Either way, refusing wasn't an option. Cautiously, she allowed the cuffs to be placed on her wrists before following him out into a corridor. They weaved through the labyrinth of hallways, past the general population cells, then through a locked steel door into what appeared to be an administrative area. The guard led her to a small office, shutting the door behind them. Aaliyah braced herself for yet another confrontation with Covington's enforcers. To her surprise, the guard removed his cap, turned, and offered a sympathetic smile. "Agent Carter," he whispered. Her heart jumped. "Yes." He held out a plastic bag containing a granola bar and a small bottle of water. "I'm not on Covington's payroll. A friend of yours, I think his name was Mo, approached me. Told me you were working on something big." Aaliyah looked at him warily. "Why should I trust you?" He gave a faint shrug, sincerity in his eyes. "I've seen what goes on in this place." I kept my head down. "But not all of us are dirty." He paused, sliding the bag toward her. "I don't have the power to free you, but I can get you small comforts, pass messages discreetly. I'm risking my job, possibly my life." After days of physical and psychological abuse, Aaliyah was wary of any sudden altruism. But something about this guard seemed genuine. "What's your name?" He hesitated. "It's Darius. Darius Bell." "All right, Darius, I appreciate the help, but be careful. If Covington finds out you're helping me, I know," he cut in quietly. "I'll keep it discreet. Now, I was told to give you this." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a tiny slip of paper. "You can flush it after reading." She took it, unfolding the note with trembling fingers. "Aaliyah, we've secured outside support. A federal judge is reviewing the warrant. We'll storm the gate soon. Hold on, Mo." Aaliyah exhaled shakily, relief mingling with apprehension. The cavalry was indeed on its way, but soon was a dangerously vague timeline. She handed the note back to Darius, who promptly tore it up and flushed the scraps in a small adjoining bathroom. When he returned, he placed the water bottle and granola bar on a desk, then re-cuffed her hands. "Now, I'll walk you back," he said, projecting a stern guard-like voice in case anyone was listening. "Don't forget, you're still a prisoner here." She gave the barest nod of understanding. They walked back in silence, passing a few suspicious glares from other officers. Once inside her cell, Darius nodded curtly and left. The small act of kindness, the water, the note felt like a lifeline in a sea of despair. Aaliyah sipped from the bottle, grateful for something that wasn't lukewarm tap water from the cell sink. And the granola bar tasted like heaven compared to the jail food she'd been enduring. Even more important was the knowledge that Mo was making real progress on the outside. She just had to survive a little longer, and so she waited. Days stretched on, her body aching from the repeated interrogations courtesy of Covington's cronies. Yet each day also brought a new sense of defiance within her. She refused to yield. With Darius's help, she managed to smuggle out a cryptic message to Mo, a quick update about Covington's threats and the times she was being taken to that storeroom. She prayed it would help the feds build their case for an immediate extraction. Meanwhile, Covington's frustrations mounted. Each interrogation yielded nothing. He tried bribery, flattery, intimidation, and outright violence. Aaliyah said nothing. She never revealed the location of her real files, most of which she no longer even possessed, thanks to the FBI's secure data centers. In his eyes, she was simply being stubborn. In truth, she was preserving the mission. The turning point came one stormy night when Covington himself strode into her cell with two of his officers. She was rousted from a fitful sleep, blinking against the harsh overhead light. "All right, Miss Carter," Covington said, his polished shoes clicking ominously on the concrete floor. "I grow tired of this cat-and-mouse game." He waved a hand, and one of the officers stepped forward, brandishing a nightstick. Aaliyah's muscles tensed with dread. This was clearly an unofficial visit. Covington crouched down so that he was at eye level with her. "I want to make you a final offer. Give me the files. In return, I promise you'll walk out of here alive." She studied his face. The mask of civility had cracked, revealing the ruthless criminal beneath. "I'm not afraid of you," she managed, voice hoarse. He offered a chilling smile. "You should be." In the silence that followed, thunder rumbled outside. A flash of lightning illuminated the small window, momentarily lighting Covington's face with a ghostly glow. Then, with a curt nod from the judge, the officer raised the nightstick. Aaliyah braced herself for the blow, but before it could descend, the hallway filled with an echoing din, sirens blaring, shouted commands, and running footsteps. Covington froze. "What the?" he muttered, glancing toward the corridor. At that moment, the cell block door was kicked open. Armed agents in tactical gear poured in, shouting for everyone to get on the ground. Their vests bore the letters FBI in bold yellow. Aaliyah's heart soared. Covington spun around, a snarl forming on his lips. Another flash of lightning silhouetted the figures rushing in. Mo was at the forefront, weapon raised, flanked by a squad of heavily armed agents. One of Covington's officers lunged, but Mo's team subdued him swiftly. Within seconds, Covington found himself staring down the barrels of multiple rifles. For an instant, time seemed suspended. Then Covington barked, "What is the meaning of this?" "I am Judge Maxwell Covington. I order you to stand down." Mo flashed a grim smile. "You're under federal arrest, Your Honor." He spat the last words sarcastically, "Hands where we can see them." Chaos erupted as FBI agents stormed through the corridors, securing officers who'd been loyal to Covington. Some resisted, but the overwhelming show of force quickly quashed any opposition. The clang of handcuffs echoed up and down the hallway. Covington tried to regain his composure. "This is an outrage. I'll have your badges." Mo ignored him, stepping forward to check on Aaliyah. She was battered, bruised, but still standing tall. A flicker of relief passed between them. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, swallowing a wave of emotion. "I am now." By then, more agents had crowded into the cell block. They pinned Covington's arms behind his back and cuffed him. He sputtered protests, but no one was listening. Sergeant Briggs and Officer Fulton were similarly restrained, their faces a mask of defeat. Darius appeared in the hallway, carefully keeping his distance. He shot Aaliyah a look of concern, and she gave him a grateful nod. Mo escorted Aaliyah out of the cell, draping a jacket over her shoulders. "We have a medical team waiting. Let's get you checked out." "And Covington?" she asked, the last vestiges of adrenaline fueling her question. Mo's eyes narrowed. "He's finished. We have more than enough to indict him on corruption, obstruction of justice, kidnapping, assault, you name it. The Department of Justice has authorized immediate proceedings in federal court. He's not slipping away this time." Aaliyah felt a surge of vindication. All the beatings, the psychological torment, the hopeless nights, this moment made it all worth it. The corrupt judge, who had tormented the city for so long, was finally in handcuffs, experiencing the raw, unfiltered power of real justice. As she limped through the corridors, flanked by FBI agents, she passed a row of stunned officers. Some had never been part of Covington's circle, but they were too frightened or apathetic to oppose him. Others had actively participated in the corruption. One by one, they were being questioned, cuffed, or released, depending on evidence of wrongdoing. The entire department was under sweeping federal oversight now. Exiting into the stormy night, rain soaked Alia's hair and face, but she barely felt it. Floodlights illuminated the scene. Multiple police vehicles, FBI vans, a news crew kept at bay by barricades. This was a spectacle that would soon broadcast across Atlanta, and maybe even the nation. The downfall of a once untouchable judge. Mo guided her toward an ambulance. "You need a hospital check." Alia couldn't argue. Her ribs ached with every breath, and she was fairly certain she had bruises that would last for weeks. Still, she couldn't help the triumphant grin spreading across her face. "Thank you, Mo." He gave her a gentle pat on the shoulder. "You earned this. Get some rest, and then we'll work on your statement. We want to make sure Covington and his cronies go away for good." Alia allowed the EMTs to help her onto a stretcher, her mind spinning with relief and victory. Yes, there would be paperwork, depositions, perhaps a media circus. But the hardest part was over. Covington was caught. His empire of corruption was dismantled, and for the first time in weeks, Alia felt truly free. A week later, the city of Atlanta buzzed with the shockwaves of Covington's arrest. Headlines blared, prominent judge charged in massive corruption scandal, FBI sting exposes police judicial bribery scheme, and variations of the same across national outlets. Alia spent 2 days in the hospital, recovering from bruised ribs and internal swelling. During that time, Mo and the FBI brass paid her multiple visits to debrief her. They praised her resilience, acknowledging that she had risked her life to see the operation through. In addition to Covington's takedown, dozens of police officers faced suspension or arrest. And while not every crooked cop had been flushed out, the operation had broken the back of their core network. The day after her hospital discharge, Alia stood on the steps of the Richard B. Russell Federal Building, about to give a brief statement to the press. Despite her attempt to stay composed, nervous energy fluttered in her chest. She wore a simple blouse and blazer, the bruises on her face nearly healed, but still visible enough to remind everyone of the violence she'd endured. Camera shutters clicked incessantly. A cluster of reporters thrust microphones forward. "Agent Carter, can you comment on your experience?" one shouted. She took a breath. "I'm grateful to the FBI for their quick action and to the federal court that issued the warrant to arrest Judge Covington. No one is above the law. Corruption in any form undermines the trust people place in our justice system. We hope this serves as a warning to others who think they can manipulate the system for personal gain." Another reporter: "Are you concerned that other officials may still be part of the conspiracy?" Alia nodded solemnly. "We've uncovered a significant network, and the investigation is ongoing. Anyone found to be involved will be held accountable." The cameras flashed like lightning. More questions followed, but she kept her answers succinct. After a few minutes, Mo stepped forward and guided her away from the barrage of microphones. Shielding her from the crowd, they slipped into a waiting car, heading back to the local field office. Inside the car, Mo exhaled loudly. "Well, that's one part done. Now the real fun begins: trials, depositions, appeals." "Covington won't go down quietly," Alia shrugged. "Let him fight. The evidence is overwhelming. And with the diner footage, the finances, plus testimonies from some of his own officers flipping for plea deals, he doesn't stand a chance." Mo's phone buzzed. He checked it, frowned, then handed it to Alia. "A text from Darius. They've discovered I helped you. I've been suspended. They're investigating me." Alia felt a pang of guilt. "I figured that might happen. He took a big risk." Mo grimaced. "We'll put in a good word with the Internal Review Board. Testify that he was instrumental in securing Covington's arrest. That might save his job, or at least keep him out of jail." She nodded, making a mental note to personally thank Darius. He deserves better. The car merged onto the freeway, weaving through late morning traffic. Though the tension of captivity had vanished, Aaliyah felt a new weight, the responsibility of seeing this case through to the end, ensuring no one else got away with such brazen abuse of power. 3 months later, Judge Covington's trial began in a federal courthouse. The spectacle drew massive media attention. A once revered figure now sat at the defense table, flanked by high-priced attorneys determined to spin a narrative of entrapment by the FBI. But the prosecution's case was robust. Recordings of bribe exchanges, financial documents, witness testimonies, and crucially, the diner security footage showing the planted drugs on Aaliyah. Covington's attorneys tried every trick in the book, questioning the admissibility of evidence, accusing the FBI of misconduct, claiming entrapment. They tried to undermine Aaliyah's credibility, pointing out the false driver's license and her infiltration tactics. Yet the jury seemed to grasp the larger picture. Covington's corruption was systemic and sinister. Officer Fulton, facing a litany of charges, flipped and testified in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony confirmed Covington's pivotal role in orchestrating bribes and framing innocent people. Sergeant Briggs tried to stand firm, but ultimately buckled under cross-examination, admitting to multiple instances of planting evidence at Covington's behest. Aaliyah herself took the stand on the trial's 4th day. She recounted her infiltration, her arrest, and the abuse suffered while in Covington's custody. Her words left the courtroom hushed. People were appalled that someone entrusted with judicial power could stoop to such violence and dishonesty. Then came the final twist. The defense called a surprise witness, a small-time drug dealer who claimed he had worked with the FBI and Covington. He alleged that Aaliyah had coerced him into lying about Covington's involvement. The gallery buzzed with whispers. Even the prosecution looked momentarily startled. Aaliyah stared at the man, trying to recall if she had ever encountered him. It dawned on her that this was another attempt by Covington's allies to fabricate a story. The cross-examination revealed glaring inconsistencies. The man's timeline didn't match, and he'd never even interacted with Aaliyah by name. Ultimately, his testimony crumbled, leaving the defense scrambling to save face. In the end, the jury deliberated for less than a day. They returned a verdict of guilty on multiple counts, including conspiracy, bribery, obstruction of justice, and assault. Judge Covington showed little emotion as the foreperson read the verdict, but the tension in his jaw betrayed his anger. Sentencing was scheduled for a later date, and Covington was remanded into federal custody without bail. A sense of relief washed over Aaliyah. Justice had been served, though at a high personal cost. Even outside the courtroom, she felt a swirl of mixed emotions: vindication, sorrow for those who had been victimized by Covington's reign, and a lingering fear that more corruption might still lurk in the shadows. Weeks later, Judge Maxwell Covington faced sentencing in a packed federal courtroom. The once revered figure now sat in shackles, his once impeccable reputation destroyed. The presiding judge, Brenda Holcomb, called Covington's acts a gross betrayal of the public trust, highlighting how he had systematically bent the law to fill his pockets and maintain absolute power. A hush fell over the courtroom as she handed down the sentence: 40 years in a high-security federal prison, with eligibility for parole only after 25. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Covington's expression remained locked in stony silence, but the subtle clench of his jaw revealed his rage at the crushing punishment. Officer Fulton, having testified against Covington, received 15 years. Sergeant Briggs got 20. Other officers involved in the conspiracy faced sentences or suspensions, each depending on their level of complicity. The city's police department began a sweeping overhaul under federal supervision. rebuilding public trust that Covington's reign of corruption had shattered. Outside, a throng of reporters documented Covington's final moments as a free man, camera flashes capturing the stark reality. The judge, who had once orchestrated sham hearings and planted evidence, now marched off in handcuffs. Watching from a distance, Aaliyah felt a wave of vindication. The bruises on her body had mostly faded, but the memory of her ordeal remained strong, a reminder that justice, though tested, had ultimately prevailed. That evening, she joined Mo and a handful of colleagues at a modest bar. They raised glasses to celebrate Covington's downfall and the city's renewed hope. Darius Bell also stopped by, still uncertain about his own future, but grateful he had done the right thing. Despite the challenges ahead, appeals, more investigations, and lingering corruption, the night felt brighter. They had fought hard, and the scales of justice had balanced again. And so ends the saga of Judge Maxwell Covington, whose greed and twisted sense of power led to his own undoing. Aaliyah Carter, once a mere defendant in his courtroom, emerged as the FBI agent who shattered his corrupt empire. From the planted evidence in a dingy diner to the high-stakes courtroom battle that followed, karma struck with unstoppable force. Covington went from presiding over trials to facing one of his own, ultimately receiving a sentence befitting his betrayal of public trust. But this story is more than just a takedown, it's a call to action. When honest citizens and dedicated officers unite against corruption, even the mightiest can fall. If you found this story thrilling and inspiring, please hit that like button. Share it with others who love real-life drama and justice. And subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of good triumphing over evil. Together, let's keep the flame of justice burning bright.